Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System 2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with my friend, Yoel, who is the principal and co-CEO of Chase Properties. You've been there for over 19 years. So, Yoel, tell me, what is one contrarian bet that you've made in real estate that's made you a lot of money over the past 5 years?
Yeah. For contrarian, it'd have to be retail. We invest in three sectors: retail, industrial, multifamily, and everything is current cash flowing, stable assets in under the radar markets. But we've been investing in retail over not just the past 5 years, actually for 50 plus years, but it's been the last decade where the world thought we were, because of e-commerce and Amazon and the idea that the trends are going to be such that we won't need physical bricks and mortar for retail anymore. And, what are you guys doing continuing to buy these assets, these shopping centers, when that's all changing in how people shop? And our philosophy was always that people, for centuries have liked to, from the markets in ancient times to today, people need bricks and mortar physical stores, especially for basic goods and services to exist. And we invest in centers that the anchors are groups like TJ Maxx and Ross Dress for Less, where outside of just all the other stores that you can go for haircuts and other services, they tend to be experiential stores where people have the hunt and get a chance to look for discounted things and really enjoy that. And that's why those companies have done well over the last decade as well. And while we didn't think we were being contrarian, the market felt strongly that retail was going away. And that also is what accounted for no new development being done over the last 15 years, really. So what's happened is that, retail, as you can see from store sales, has continued to do very well. And as retailers need to expand, there's nowhere for them to go. So when stores and the reason that like the e-commerce effect has not hurt these retailers, but really helped them, is that the better retailers figured out how to integrate their stores with e-commerce and do what's called omni-channel marketing, to integrate online with bricks and mortar for people to buy online, pick up in store, showroom, return. And chains like Best Buy tell us all the time that they need our stores. Specifically, our strategy is to be in secondary and tertiary markets throughout the U.S. So we tend to be pretty isolated. And they tell us that if our store didn't exist, their online volume would disappear because people need to know that they can return an item or check out an item, or they typically won't buy it online. So they've become mini distribution hubs in many ways. Target's been famous for this, but the retailers that didn't figure it out are the ones that really went out of business, like Bed Bath & Beyond. And them going out of business was a big blessing for all of these other retailers that couldn't find any space, because all those good spots that the bankrupt tenants like Bed Bath & Beyond were taking were now taken up by the TJ Maxxes of the world and all their concepts, Home Goods, Sierra Trading. Burlington has been expanding like crazy, taking a lot of the vacancies of bankrupt tenants. But we're pretty much through most of the tenants that were weak. So now it's going to be very tough for these retailers to expand, which as a landlord and owner of real estate is a pretty good spot to be in. Less supply should mean continued rent growth and certainly more stability and security and downside protection for these assets, as we've got waiting lists that we've never had in decades for our space.
Wow. What's an example of one of these properties that you guys picked up when no one else was interested in it? And what were the economics around where you got into it versus how it's performing now?
Sure. I'll just tell you, like a recent home run was a center that we bought in Mishawaka, Indiana, which is South Bend's retail hub up in Indiana. And we bought that center at about 2 years ago at around a 9 cap. We typically buy our centers at 8 to 9 caps. So depending on where rates are is where that cap rate fluctuates between that range. But we bought it with a vacancy that in the retail industry, you usually pay zero for the vacancy on a cap rate basis. And just during due diligence, we were able to fill a significant vacancy with the Burlington, and that became a home run. That was just a recent deal that we did that was sort of our style of what we do. But one that is just been a solid investment for us. Another one that comes to mind is a town called Springfield in Missouri. And I had never heard of Springfield, Missouri. before we bought this asset, but we were drawn to it because of the incredibly strong tenant sales. Now, in retail, many tenants in their leases have to report sales, but sometimes they don't. So we usually get a mixed bag of our knowledge of how tenants are performing. But today we use data from a group called Placer AI, but they have some competitors where they use cell phone data to tell us foot traffic. And for this center in Springfield, it was almost like an error. It didn't make any sense that some of these stores' volumes were bigger than, major metro markets like New Jersey, New York, Boston, and that trend's continued. We've owned it now for several years, and it's a function of the stability of the market and the isolation, how far it is from the next retail hubs that make it just sort of the game in town. I don't know, in New York, what you would compare to Time Warner centers, but in Springfield, Missouri. And, we bring new team members that come from big REITs that are investing in more major metro markets. They're always like in shock. They're like, how did these centers, how come the volumes that these retailers are doing are so high? And it's just, we forget about the middle of the country, and people like to shop, and people, especially if they're isolated, will come to the one retail hub and spend their time and money there.
Super interesting. And yeah, you would not necessarily imagine that given the demographics and the population of that area that it would have such value. But since it's pulling from a much wider radius, then it's making up for the fact that it's not as densely populated as an area as it might be.
Yeah. Yeah. And these tenants, there we also have all the major players, but there are tenants like Hobby Lobby, and I don't know how much people, follow them, but they just have gotten
My kids love it.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
fantastic. So great.
yeah.
And they do such great volumes, especially. So there must be one near here if your kids go.
It's upstate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because
Yeah,
people
not
from New
here.
York don't
Yeah,
really know
yeah,
Hobby Lobby.
yeah,
So I
yeah,
was surprised that your kids know it, but
yeah.
it's like this is where people spend their time, and they have salespeople there that are incredibly knowledgeable about crafting, and it becomes like a whole experience for people. And that's not being replaced by e-commerce, and it's just been enhanced.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, so yeah, to your point, they're very passionate. The salespeople are very passionate about crafts, and they know all the things. And you can go in there and get ideas for projects, and you go in thinking you have one thing in mind, and you end up with much more volume of products because they do a phenomenal job of cross selling things just because they're passionate about what they're doing.
Exactly. I have fun when I go in as well.
Do you guys have close relationships with the retailers as well, like the TJ Maxx or Burlington's, that when you are buying up a new property, you can just give them a call and say, "Hey, have you looked at this? Here's some of the data that we're seeing." Or how do you think about like filling vacancies in some of these malls that you're buying?
Yeah. So first, it's like I have to correct you in calling them malls, because malls, everybody does that. And malls and what we do, shopping centers, are very different. Now, some malls are doing fine, but malls in our markets have not been doing well. They're really, people have changed the way that they've shopped, and they don't generally like to, walk through an indoor mall, but they're more looking for the convenience of driving, parking, and going to the store that they want, a couple stores that they want. So when I say that we love retail, it's really more about the open air shopping centers and not the indoor closed malls. Although again, I think A malls are still doing well, like the Bell Hardware shops and groups like that. But in terms of getting tenants, that is our secret sauce. Although there's nothing too secret about it. It's maintaining relationships at these retailers and doing the right thing by them. And that's what we've done. And even when the people that our company interact with are the real estate representatives for these retailers. And sometimes they move around. They go to other retailers. Like somebody will be at Burlington one day and they'll switch to Ross or Dick's Sporting Goods to PetSmart. But we've been working with those same people for decades. And not that because of that relationship, they're going to go to a bad asset, but they'll always pick up our call. So if we are looking at replacing a tenant or somebody is struggling credit-wise, we're able to get ahead of replacing them pretty quickly. And it's most important for acquisitions, because when we're doing our due diligence, whether they report sales or not, getting the insight from the tenant themselves about how they perform and what their trends have been is incredibly important for us to decide whether we want to own the asset for long term. So definitely that's the most important thing that we're doing as investors and operators, is maintaining those retailer relationships.
You see a lot of sales from different retailers across the country. I'm curious what trends you're picking up on. You mentioned pet stores, you mentioned, TJ Maxx. What are some things that stand out to you across the performance of some of these retailers in the shopping centers that you own?
Yeah, I mean, what stands out is the discounters that just continue foot traffic. Because even when retailers report sales, it might be on an annual snapshot, but we can look at foot traffic on a weekly, monthly, and just continued increases, even in this like sensitive economy right now. We're seeing and what smarter people than me are telling me is the reason for the increased sales and increased foot traffic is that not that the people who were shopping there are buying more, but people who were spending more at higher priced stores are coming down and going to the discounters now, which is why we're seeing those increases. So we're still very bullish on those users, and then anybody that has been smart to add services to their retail concept seem to continue to be doing more growth, like the pet stores that have added services. We're seeing more growth in foot traffic to them. The music stores that would sell musical instruments, but now add lessons and have people come in and kids. So that's been a very smart pivot for a lot of these retailers lately.
What kind of services have pet stores added to drive traffic?
Like veterinary services, grooming services, boarding services, that kind of thing.
Interesting. And when you think about the composition of retailers in one of these shopping centers, do you have a view of what goes well together? Or is it you just obviously letting anybody in if they're interested in leasing space? Or do you try to be a little bit more strategic on the portfolio of retailers within a center?
Yeah, this again, it comes back to us as investors, and we are a family office that also has investors along with us. And we structure our investments as long-term holds because we like to hold assets long-term. And I think that's a real difference for how people run and operate their assets, probably any asset, but it's particularly important in retail. If you're looking to add some value and do a flip quickly, then I don't think you would care as much about the mix. But we don't do that. We're really wanting to buy the best asset in our markets and hold it for as long as we can. And for that, we need to give up some higher rents or some quick fixes for some vacancies for the better mix. So while these retailers are very savvy and are very strong in their lease negotiation to make sure that another competitor doesn't come in and do the same thing as them. Even when they don't have that, we're not putting in a direct competitor when we can, when the lease allows for it. We want our retailers to perform well. So we're very conscious of if we've got a shoe store, we're not putting another shoe store in, even if we're allowed to. We really like food. Food is a really great draw for the other retailers. While we used to not like, years ago, we did not want fitness because generally people that come to gyms, they take up a lot of parking and then don't go to other stores. That's really shifted, and especially with some of the smaller square footage concepts where like an Orange Theory Fitness, where they're not taking a lot of parking, but they definitely shop at the other stores before and after the workout. We've really enjoyed bringing those guys into the mix as well.
Why does Orange Fitness not take up that much parking? Just because they're smaller?
Don't
Less
have that many
people?
members at the same
Okay.
time versus, a huge gym, then we have to make sure that the parking is not going to be an issue for our other tenants in the shopping center.
Interesting. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, there's all these second order effects between the tenants and other tenants. Yeah, that's an interesting concept of like if you can have a great draw at a shopping center, but if they're not cross shopping other retailers, it's not a great tenant.
Right. I mean, every other day we get requests from the like smoke shops and vape shops. They're just not they don't bring a great crowd for the other retailers. So we try to avoid those. Sometimes we'll buy a center and they'll have a tenant that's already there because a seller was trying to get maximum value. So there might be like a dialysis center that, good for the community, but it's certainly not a draw or help for our center. So those are, sometimes we'll have those tenants in the centers because we bought them, but they're not tenants that we think really add a lot to the mix and the ability to cross shop within the center.
Yeah, that's super interesting. You also have a contrarian view when it comes to fundraising and the types of allocators that you prefer to raise money from. Say more about that.
Sure. I mean, it's just top of mind because I've been having discussions with my partner as recent as a couple days ago about this topic, because as we continue to be experts in this retail investing space, we know that there are institutions like pension funds that would likely want to partner with us to really scale up and buy maybe big portfolios. And that would be great. Many of these portfolios we would like to own. But the challenge is, and we can get around it. We can work with those institutions. So if any of your listeners are institutions, feel free to call me. We'll buy the portfolio with you. But long run, my own, I don't know if it's a contrarian view or it's more my comfort zone around having, complete investor alignment with me and our family is long-term ownership of real estate. That's where we've made the most money. That's where we've seen wealth created by people in general in real estate, is less of the short-term, add some value or hold it for a certain period to get your IRR and then exit. But once you have a good asset, and it's particularly the case in retail, because if you have that monopolistic position in the market, you'll do well for years. And the institutions generally have these 3 to 5 year, more commonly 5-year windows. And my preference has always been family offices and high net worth who also don't want to exit just because of some IRR that'll be better in a shorter period, but really want to continue that great cash flow. And, long term, when I look at some of our best centers, we have a center in Peabody, Massachusetts, and my father-in-law developed that center. This is our business, a family business that my wife's father started 53 years ago. And, no matter what happens with retailers, they come and go. We had a Party City went bankrupt. We always get better tenants that pay more rent, decades later. And, when it's great real estate and you have a great position, it just continues to be an asset that, like, I hope my grandchildren have ownership of. And that's a little bit different when you're working with an institution. You're really set up to exit and be a little bit more short-term minded. And while we can do that, and we have done it with institutions, I'd rather generally stay smaller and buy the assets that I personally want to own forever.
Speaking of family offices, before joining your father-in-law's business, you had a successful career of your own in equity derivatives, I believe. What were the challenges of joining a family business as someone who is very ambitious?
It's a great question. I appreciate that your research or checking my LinkedIn to know about my derivatives background. The challenges for me were, when I joined, were less about family and more about the pace of a Wall Street finance, trading, structuring role to real estate. Here I'm just talking about how real estate is like the long game. Everything is long in real estate, from just being able to find an asset you want to buy to owning it to improving it, versus in my old career, it was, very fast. Things change overnight. I would be, pivoting in the middle of the night with things happening in Europe. And with real estate, it was very hard to get used to the slowness. It was also what was appealing to me, the common sense and intrinsic value of real estate versus very esoteric model-based, like Monte Carlo-based models figuring out the value of what your derivative product was and what your risk really was. So it was what drew me to joining my wife's family's business, but it was also the challenge of the pace and also the culture. I joined a business our business is based in Cleveland, Ohio, and Cleveland's, very Midwestern culture, and people in general that I was exposed to did not work in also the pace, but just the kind of urgency that I was used to on Wall Street, that really became part of who I was and who I am today still. I'm still usually the last person that leaves, even as co-CEO, not because obviously I have no one to do FaceTime for, but because I've got this drive in me that was established from, my first boss on Wall Street, Maria, who was like, you got goals, you got to do whatever it takes to get them. And that was in derivatives. And we would all be there till midnight when we needed to, or up all night if we needed to, if there was something going on in Asia or Europe. But that was hard to get used to, and hard for people to get used to me, I think. When I joined, I think most of the family business associates that were working there looked at me like I was crazy. And that was just who I was from my background. So that was the toughest transition for me. I had to learn to really slow down and to meet people where they were at, and then bring some people to my pace, which has worked out well too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really fascinating to see that transition from like fast-paced Wall Street to this decades and like centuries long investment strategy in real estate that you guys currently have. I'm curious how that from a personal level, if you're trying to make a name for yourself in the family business, was there part of you that's like more impatient? Like, I don't have time to wait around a century to prove to everybody that I can achieve more. I think you made a point earlier in a previous conversation around the different appetite towards risk of a family office that's been around for a long time versus someone who's new in that family office that wants to maybe do more, do things faster. Like, how was that for you?
Great question. And I think you're touching on it through your question about risk. So family offices, generally, they've made their wealth and they're more the family's looking to preserve and not necessarily grow. So then enters son-in-law, which is a different dynamic. I'm not expecting to inherit anything. I'm still, looking to build my own capital. And while I had the comfort to take my time and work with the family to buy an asset here and there, it may never happen for me to really build meaningful capital. So for me, the solution was to bring outside capital in so that we could grow our business, but capital that was aligned with us that we also want to hold long term, like my wife's family. That way we could scale. My wife's family could be more diversified because their same check, instead of going into one asset, could go into 10 assets. And then by me working to bring the capital and more deals in, me and my partner, who's my brother-in-law, could participate in the GP of that outside capital. So that was my solution. And I think a solution I see common in next generations of family offices. And especially when there are son-in-laws. I know we know some others like that where that's what it takes to use maybe the platform that you have experience or the family has experience and be more involved is to really bring outside capital in.
Yeah, it's a really clever strategy because it scratches like both itches. On one hand, for the family, diversifies, which helps with reducing risk, and which is their goal of wealth preservation. But it also helps grow the total like AUM that can then lead to bigger personal gain for you as well.
Exactly. My father-in-law is just a super smart and nice, like great guy. People love being around him and they love hearing what he has to say, but he doesn't want to spend his life bringing outside capital in. So he does, but not begrudgingly. He comes to the meetings and people they love hearing from him. But that was an accommodation, I think, for me to be okay with all of a sudden having not just himself to answer to, but having this group of investors. So it's been an interesting experience. I think, he genuinely enjoys people and enjoys talking about investments. So I think he enjoys it, but it's been interesting to watch that dynamic as somebody that really didn't have any interest in bringing outside capital in, but was sort of willing to do it for the next generation.
Was it easy or hard to convince them to bring outside capital in? Like, how did you
It was
have
hard. It was hard. And I remember this one close friend of mine, Ellie, who I think his wife, she's in a group we're in, was the one who gave me the idea how to manage this sort of family office, family business and growth to bring in outside capital. It was his influence. And then our lawyer, who, when I brought up the idea of we're going to start a fund, what do you think about that? His name is Jeff. And now he leads a very large firm that's based in Cleveland called Benish. He said, it's a no-brainer. You're gonna raise money. Your father-in-law's reputation for his strategy is well known by the street. So you will be successful. And I remember when I told Stuart, is my father-in-law's name, when I told Stuart about Jeff's comment, that was when the switch flipped. And he's like, really? Okay, fine, let's do it. I think he needed to hear from somebody that wasn't us in family that, it won't be hard for us. And it wasn't hard for us. Jeff was right.
Yeah. I'm wondering, on the personal side, I have a father-in-law. I remember what it was like in the early days. You're trying to impress him and, do right by his daughter. And that relationship, evolves over time. I'm curious how your relationship with your father-in-law changed after you brought in this outside capital. Like, did he always see you as someone who is ambitious and able to take over the family business, or was this something that you had to slowly earn his trust over many years to the point where you're now co-CIO of it?
Yeah, I think for him to put both me and my brother-in-law Andy as co-CEO and step back to chairman, that he had to see us, running the business for many years. Originally, I ran leasing and operations, and my brother-in-law ran acquisitions, and then we transitioned for Andy to really look over retail and for me to focus on capital and on equity and debt and some of our newer businesses, including industrial and multifamily. So I think when he experienced several years of us being able to get things done, he got comfortable with that. But in terms of me personally, no, I think coming off, my guess is coming off of a successful career in finance, a hard to excel kind of career. I think I came in with some credibility for him where he wasn't concerned about my work ethic or my ability to figure things out. That would be my guess, but I've never really asked him if it took him a while. I don't think I would have joined the family business if I didn't have a successful career. Like I don't think I would have wanted to because it would have been hard for me to feel whether I've had success because it's hard to get fired from a family business. And I would have, and I think about this for my own kids. If they ever have interest in joining our business, I wouldn't want to have them until they've been able to prove to themselves that they can be successful at something, whatever it is.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, like, how would you feel about not your kids, but one of your in-laws, like your kids' spouses who wanted to come in and run the business 20, 30 years from now? How do you think about succession going down to the next generation?
Yeah. I mean, I'd love it. I think that it's really the only way to keep a business. It's probably not the only way. There are ways of setting up trusts and having sort of rules in place to keep a business past when family members are involved. But it's certainly a way to keep interests aligned and the family values in place and trust. We've been through some rocky times, and you don't have to worry about a family member, an in-law or otherwise, that your interests aren't completely aligned. And so I love family members being involved. I know that there are many businesses that specifically don't keep family members, but I think the pros outweigh the cons. There's certainly cons. There's a lot of, and we've experienced them. There's family relations that have to always be kept front and center so that you're not bringing maybe stressful work arguments home to Thanksgiving. But to me, the pros outweigh the cons. But for any of those people, having proved success elsewhere, I think is incredibly important because I think they'll feel unsure of themselves. And I know this from personal experience because I'm in the real estate business, and it tends to be a multi-generational business where I see, grandchildren all the time. And I see those people who never worked anywhere else. They graduated college and were right into their family business, struggle with, was it, if the business did have successes, was it me or was it this family business that I just got given? And I think that's hard for people.
How does having brought in institutional capital change some of this? What are the new kinds of governance that have been put in place that may potentially prevent some of this family succession from happening? Or how do you guys make sure that you can achieve both of the family goals while also being good partners to institutional investors?
Well, I guess I should. So our most recent capital has come from a partnership with you could almost call it an institutional partnership, but it's a friend of mine that I knew through my New York Wall Street days that he started a very successful family office, Michael Dell's family office, and then retired and started his own family office and seeded a fund of his own family office and other families to invest in exclusively in our real estate. So you could call that an institutional investor because of the scale and the size, over 100 million kind of category. And therefore, things like audits versus reviews. The investment committee is pretty formal, and my friend Glenn, who's our partner, and James, also our partner, are on our investment committee, and we have pretty formal processes to make sure we're all aligned in the investments we make. But because Glenn and James are families and their investors are families, back to sort of the long-term ownership mindset. Everyone is aligned from a hold period, the kinds which impacts the kind of debt we have, the kind of leverage we want. We're very careful not to have too much leverage, which is where a lot of real estate players who are searching for the best IRR have gotten in trouble in different cycles.
How
So
much is too much leverage for you?
we don't look at things over 65%. So we're really staying in the 60 to 65% range. Even when there are periods of time where we're being thrown 90%, we won't take it because we know there's going to be periods of time where we're going to have some vacancies and we're going to need the breathing room not to be desperate to put the wrong kind of tenant in or to not put the right amount of capital in to improve the center or the other industrial asset or otherwise. So we're very, very careful on leverage and our investors are in line versus a shorter term mindset institution. Again, we can do it and we have done it. We did a deal with an institution not too long ago who did have a 5-year window and we were longer term minded. So when it was time for them to exit, we bought them out. We found investors to buy out the institution. So we find ways to navigate even with a shorter term institutional partner. But that institution, we can still do what we need to do. We can put the right tenants in, but it's just a lot more time because we'll have to get approvals, a lot of reporting that we don't have with families, a lot of extra site visits with the partner beyond our own site visits. So it's just more operationally intensive and therefore the scale has to be worth it.
Yeah. I'm curious. Yeah, you mentioned some of the going through the rougher times, especially when you have such a long-term outlook, you will experience different cycles. And even to your point about not wanting too much leverage, did you learn that the hard way? I'm curious about what are some of the things that have gone wrong in the past and how you guys adapted to that.
Yeah. Some things that come to mind when I was talking about difficult times one was fixing our culture, having employees that it's very different when you're managing your own assets and preserving capital and being slow versus when you're in a growth mode and you need everyone on the team participating and kind of going in the same direction. So we had a period, I won't get into the details, but where through adding that rigor for growth, we sort of uncovered some very, very bad cultural stuff that was going on and had to really change our team. And it was, a big blessing because we got this extraordinary team that operates in a great way. But it was, personally tough times for me, people that said one thing to my face and after we let them go reading their emails, it was really like something movies or TV shows can be made of. That's one thing that comes to mind. Another is COVID. Even though our properties came out way ahead after COVID, because the dynamic there was that every single retailer said they don't want to pay rent. And our only way to accommodate them was for our lenders to allow us to pause our loan payments because real estate is a levered business. We have loans and we can't not take in rent and still cover our loans in totality. Everybody wanted to not pay rent, but our lenders worked with us to defer payments and our retailers that we said, okay, you don't have to pay for those 3 months, but we would like some things. We would like to extend your lease or maybe remove this one feature in the lease that's made things difficult for us to operate. So we came out with much stronger leases afterwards and much stronger relationships. Our retailers really to this day remember how good we were to work with during that time, but it was an incredibly stressful time. And I remember really leaning into my partners and, working through some of the difficulties during that period. But then from just investing where we made mistakes, it's primarily when we've gone off strategy. So, we're very disciplined about the low leverage. We're very disciplined about buying in these certain markets with, very, very strong sales volumes and isolated markets. 1031s have gotten us into some trouble where the time period has, we've let the tail wag the dog. We've let the tax savings maybe allow us to go off strategy and buy some assets that we wouldn't have bought if we had more time. And those are the lessons that we've learned. And we'll more often now pay the tax instead of buying an asset that we're not 1,000% in on.
Interesting. Which markets do you love right now for real estate?
So I love retail because of, and maybe you're talking about geographies.
Both, yeah.
So where we thrive is the Midwest, and we're in 24 states, but we love the stability of the Midwest. It doesn't have the ups and downs as long as the market has a lot of diverse employers. But the retail fundamentals, because of the lack of development, are going to remain strong for the foreseeable future. Now, finally, other people are seeing that too. So pricing is getting a little tougher for us, but we can still execute, just not quite in the volume that we were able to 2 years ago. So fundamental risk reward wise, retail for sure, the top. But industrial and multifamily, so those are our three favorite asset classes. That's why we focus on them. For the first time in a long time, we're able to buy at lower bases than we had been able to in years. The cap rates got so low, particularly in multifamily, but also in industrial, that it's very hard to make sense of an investment to have any decent return. But long term, between just-in-time delivery, e-commerce, onshore manufacturing, industrial is going to continue to thrive, and the demand for good industrial real estate is going to continue. So love to participate. It's while pricing is improved, it's not quite as no-brainer as retail is. And multifamily even more difficult. I think we all know the lack of housing there is for people in the US. And while development has really slowed down because of interest rates going up, there was a lot of development a few years ago that hasn't fully been absorbed. So buying apartments and getting the rent increases that justify the lower going in yields, the cap rates, is still difficult. But if you can find the right asset, you are buying it at a much lower basis than you would have been able to a few years ago, often at less than replacement cost. So they're still exciting. You just have to be much more nimble and picky in industrial multifamily than retail, where you can be a little bit more quick about buying.
How has AI and the craze around data center development impacted the real estate markets? And what do you think of that space?
I mean, I do think real estate's at the forefront of this AI revolution. There's no question. Certainly from a macro perspective, in how things are going to be different, how robotics are going to impact industrial buildings. There was this period of time, and still today, because we're not there yet with robotics, where part of our checklist for whether an industrial asset was going to make sense long term was, where are the people who could work at that industrial building, if there were enough people willing to take those jobs in the market. And that's all going to change because there will be less people needed. The need to be near power because of the automation that's going to require a lot of power is obviously what wasn't important to us before, and now very important. And then what I don't have a crystal ball or a good understanding, but I know I'd like to, is retail. How when everyone's in autonomous cars, how's that going to impact? Like, is our parking going to be able to be used in a different way? Multifamily, just where people are going to be able to live, because I don't think remote working's going away, and different opportunities for markets that maybe have been ignored previously. So I think from a macro level, these sectors, there's so much to figure out, to try to get ahead of. And then from a micro perspective, just especially for us, where we're buying stabilized retail with some light value add when we can, but we're buying as close to core products as we can find. The importance of operational efficiencies really matter from a return perspective. So using AI in our operations is critical for us to stay competitive for these. We're trying to solve for 8 to 9 current cash flow and 12% net IRRs. Every 50 to 100 basis points is very meaningful to us versus maybe, the developers and value add that are looking to solve for the 20s percent returns. So we are really leaning in and adding anywhere we can efficiencies and plan to do so. We're really pushing it culturally to be a focus to have as much operational efficiencies for marginal benefits that will, I think, long-term be, really helpful incrementally to our overall returns.
What do you think are some of the biggest areas for improvement in terms of that operational efficiency through AI?
I mean, certainly all of our back office work, accounting, collections, but even sourcing, being able to underwrite, in seconds, and filter deals in seconds, and just be able to store data that will help us for future decisions. And I think just make less mistakes and be led to opportunities quicker. I'm not sure if there was a call that you may have been on with a group, an industrial investor called FarrowPoint that I am close with, and they've just integrated AI into their whole platform to where their sourcing is almost entirely driven by AI, and they've been just finding incredible deals with incredible returns because they've leaned in. The CEO Adir has really leaned into AI, and it's really been phenomenal for them, and we're trying to do as much of that as we can.
How does deal sourcing currently work? Are there still a lot of mom and pop owners of some of these shopping centers, or is it all at this point pretty large? And how does that work?
It's a mix. It's still institutions and REITs, but also there are many families that have owned these assets for decades, or there are the value add groups that did maybe see some vacancy opportunities with some of the bankruptcies and were able to buy an asset to fill some vacancy and then sell. So we really see a mix of owners in across the sectors. In industrial, our best seller, our best way to source is through sale leasebacks. So it's the owner who owned the real estate, who was operating their business, that either needs capital for growth or maybe as part of an estate planning strategy, that we tend to buy and have the best tenants, the best long-term tenants for great real estate. So I wouldn't call them mom and pops, but they're companies that have owned their real estate for a long time that don't have a need if they can get a long enough lease with a long enough amount of options.
Interesting. Because I would imagine those are harder to source because they're owned by one company in one area instead of having these much larger portfolios of assets that when they do come to market, it's easier to find out.
They are hard to source. It's great when they own portfolios of assets. Like some of the private equity firms will buy companies with that have a portfolio of real estate assets that as part of the strategy that the private equity firm has for growth, they realize they don't need the real estate. And that makes it sometimes a little easier to buy more than one at a time. But typically it's very, very relationship dependent because the owner who is going from owning their building to being a tenant really has to have a lot of trust about the process that they're going to be comfortable with the lease that they sign.
I want to take a big step back and ask you a little bit about how you were as a kid. Is this the life that you had envisioned for yourself? How does what you're doing now compare to what you wanted to do as a kid?
This is a big step back. Okay, I got to rejigger my head here for a minute. So I think a lot of my ambition comes from growing up in a financially tumultuous household, meaning my parents had financial struggles. And it's funny, sometimes I'll say like I grew up poor, but poor is relative. So like I would say that, and then I one time drove my kids by my house in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which was, I remember like there was like a kid at school that like pointed to me and said, "Is that your house?" and started laughing because it was really a small, like in my whatever it was 9-year-old eyes, like it was like a poor kid's house. But my kids drove by and they're like, "You weren't poor. That's a really nice house." So everything's relative. But for me, going to the grocery store with my mom and her having to like get to the checkout and put things back because she didn't have enough money to pay for the groceries, I think really impacted me in a way that I thought like I'm going to grow up and I'm not going to live that way. I want to really have a lot of safety and financial security.
How did your mom react to that situation where she had to put stuff back in the grocery store? Was she embarrassed? It didn't faze her? How did she react?
Gosh, that's such a good question. I got to remember. I don't think she was embarrassed, but I think she was sad. I think she blamed my father, probably, for just not, I don't know, making enough money. I think she was just frustrated. But they also didn't care about money. Like they were they were content in their financial tumult. Like they didn't, I don't know, when I started working on Wall Street and started making a lot of money, it wasn't like they were impressed. They were proud of me that I was doing something I loved, but they weren't like, they didn't really care about material things in that way. So I don't know, I'm thinking through this. So this is becoming more of a therapy session now, but
were they happy it sounds like it didn't bother them as much. Like, would you say that they were happy or they just had other sorts of frustration and troubles?
I don't think they were happy with the tumult, but it wasn't what was important to them. Like what was important to them was family and community. Like that was what they were focused on. They did a lot of like charitable type work. Like they had a lot of sort of unfortunate people over to the house where they could be helpful to them. Someone going through a divorce or someone, an elderly family that had no family that, would come to our Shabbat or a holiday. And I remember I had this uncle who would be very frustrated with my parents' financial situation. Like, why don't they have like financial stability? And he would, once I started working and making my own money, he would call me and say, what are you doing about your parents? Like, you need to get them in order. And one comment he made to me that has always stuck through to me is like, have you ever noticed that, all the people that your parents hang out with are like poor? And that's why they're always, they don't surround themselves with upward mobile people. And he was saying that as a negative thing. And for me, it's always been like a super positive thing. Like my parents didn't care. There were more things that were important than surrounding themselves with, upwardly mobile people. And, I'm even now, I'm envious of that ability to see above material needs.
So what was it about? I mean, it sounds like they knew what they wanted and they were happy with family and community. And I'm curious, like, what was it for you that made you attain like material wealth so much more? And you mentioned some of the tumultuousness there. Like, how does that, I mean, it seems like maybe it impacted you more than your parents, or like, yeah, what was it that made you want to go in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think from a young age, it was so that I could help take care of my parents and help them because I knew that they weren't going to be able to get old and retire. So I was driven originally before I had my own family to be able to help my parents. Like if I'm not going to do it, nobody is. And thank God I was able to have some satisfaction of doing that a bit before they passed away. But that was the original driver. And then for me, for my own family, like I wasn't willing to date anyone seriously until I had established some financial security. I didn't want to even start setting up a family or a household until I could do it responsibly. So that it wouldn't live like my parents. But
You mentioned that your parents didn't really care about how much money you were making. I'm curious, yeah, what were they proud of you for? What were the things that they valued more in what you did with your life?
I mean, it's going to sound cheesy, but it was always like kindness. They were very into kindness, and I remember they were very proud of this one sister I had that worked with autistic children and helping kids, and a brother who focused on more religious pursuits. And when I didn't do things that were, if I didn't go visit the old age home, my mom would be very disappointed in me. So that was really what was, their value.
No. Do you find yourself doing some of those things now in terms of hanging out with poor people or visiting the elderly homes or?
Mostly with my checkbook, and I do enjoy it. I do enjoy giving charity, and I think about my parents almost every time I do. But no, and I know how disappointed, particularly my mom would be in that, but it just hasn't been my focus.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so interesting because yeah, my grandfather was in a very similar way. Like he just didn't, I grew up in Romania, and when we came here, like to him coming to America was it. Like everyone was rich in America. Like what does it matter that you're making like whatever, so much more? Because at that point it was already so much to him. And yeah, I remember, yeah, I had jobs on like Wall Street, and I was just telling him about all these things, and he's just like, okay, so yeah, that's great. Like, I was very excited, but yeah, tell me about something else. And yeah, it is kind of interesting to reflect back on what is driving us to do things versus what some of the people in our lives actually find interesting. Yeah, exactly your point. It's not to say that they liked it. They thought it was nice. You have stability, you have all these things, but somehow that wasn't the game that should be playing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just fascinating to think about, and I'm curious, like how do you think about this for the next generation, for your children? What do you wish for them? How do you think about their choice of careers or life pursuits?
Great question. And I'm really in it right now because my oldest son graduated high school last year and he's going to go to college. He did a gap year, and I have no blueprint for this because my parents were completely uninvolved in whether I went to college or not. They weren't able to afford to pay for college. So everything was loans, what career path, internships. I had these friends in college that their father's friends and he's going to go to college. He did a GATS because my parents were completely uninvolved in whether I went to college or not. They weren't able to afford to pay for college. So everything was loans, what career path, internships. I had these friends in college that their father's friends helped them get their internships. And, I didn't have any of that. And in many ways, I think that that was a good thing for me because it forced me to sort of figure things out. So I'm in this place where my kids, fortunately, because I didn't want them to be raised the way I was, but they were raised in a much more cushy situation that I don't think that they're going to be as wired to be driven for success as I was. And I also do have those friends and connections to help with internships or career advice. So I've been trying to lean in some advice I've gotten from when I see other parents with kids who seem to be really enjoying their careers or their paths. And that is if my kids are showing interest in something, I just try to really support that thing, whether it's music or basketball or business. This one son of mine, my second oldest, seems very interested in business. He's doing this, I told him about the story about Steve Jobs, which you probably know. When he was a kid, he called the CEO of Hewlett Packard or the chairman of Hewlett Packard and said, "Hey, I'm really interested to see how it works. What you guys are building." And since he was a kid, the guy was like, "Sure, come on in and spend some time." But if he was an adult, he never would have taken the call. And I remember telling my kids that, hey, if you want to get access to exciting stuff, use your youth. Because just like for me, if some kid called me, I'd always take the call. And I do take the calls. And this one son of mine, Noah, really has leaned into that. And for the past few years, he's been cold calling every CEO in the world. And I think 99 don't call him back or email him back, but that 1% that does, he's had these incredible experiences and opportunities, and he's learning a lot, and he's really interested because of his learnings. So I took him to our industry conference, our big retail real estate conference in Las Vegas last month. And that was really fun. So these are opportunities I didn't have that I'm giving my kids, and we'll see how it, affects them, hopefully in a positive way.
I love that idea, is to use what is otherwise a disadvantage to your advantage, where, youth in most cases is hard to land the dream job, but it's very easy to pick up the phone and then call some senior people who would maybe see themselves in the younger version of themselves in that kid and take the meeting. And I think, this is phenomenal.
Yeah, his next meeting is with Howard Marks next week.
No way.
Yeah, meet these guys. They're so nice.
Yeah.
And they'll take a call from the 11th grader and spend some time with them.
Yeah. Well, all this is, it's amazing. I love ending on that piece of advice and taking some of our weaknesses and turning them into strengths. And thank you so much for sharing your personal and professional story.
Thank you, Mate. Your questions and you've helped me before with your insightful questions are always fantastic, and I appreciate spending the time.
Awesome. Thanks a lot.